Welcome to World True Crime. Here we explore the most shocking and mysterious cases from around the globe, unraveling the facts behind real-life crimes that have left the world in awe. Today, we are uncovering the story of Liam's family. James Liam, a successful businessman, his wife Barbara, a dedicated homemaker, and Barbara's daughter from a previous marriage, Mary, lived in a sprawling house. Their neighbors saw them as the perfect family. Affluent, attractive, and seemingly happy, but beneath the polished exterior of manicured lawns and dinner parties, a sinister undercurrent was about to pull the mammoths into a vortex of forbidden desire, betrayal, and ultimately violence. What began as a typical case of marital discontent would spiral into a shocking tale of taboo romance between stepfather and stepdaughter, culminating in a confrontation that ended in twisted death. And others' lives shattered beyond repair. James and Barbara Liam's romance began like many others with a chance encounter at a charity gala in Philadelphia in the spring of 2010. James, then 35, was a rising star in the world of finance, known for his sharp mind and charismatic personal. Barbara, 32 at the time, was a divorce with a young daughter, working as an interior designer for wealthy clients. Their whirlwind courtship captivated their social circle. James was smitten by Barbara's elegance and wit, while Barbara saw in James the stability and success she craved after her tumultuous first marriage within 6 months. James had proposed, presenting Barbara with a dazzling diamond ring that became the envy of their friends. The wedding, held at the prestigious Rittenhouse Hotel, was the social event of the season. Barbara's 7-year-old daughter Mary served as the flower girl, her cherubic face beaming as she watched her mother marry the man would become her stepfather for the first few years. The Barbara seemed to thrive. James's career continued to soar, and he was soon made partner at his firm. Barbara threw herself into the role of the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties and charity events that cemented their status in elite circles. She doted on Mary, ensuring the girl wanted for nothing from the best schools to extravagant vacations. But as the novelty of their new life together wore off, cracks began to appear in the foundation of their marriage. James's long hours at the office and frequent business trips left Barbara feeling neglected. She had given up her career to support his, and now found herself increasingly isolated in their large, empty house. Barbara's attempts to rekindle the romance were met with indifference from James, who seemed more interested in his spreadsheet than his wife. Their conversations, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, became tour exchanges about household matters and Mary's school schedule. By the time Mary entered high school, the Liams' marriage existed mostly for show. They slept in separate bedrooms, citing James' snoring as the reason to curious friends. Their interactions were cordial but cold, like business partners, rather than loving spouses. Barbara threw herself into volunteer work and her role as Mary's mother, living vicariously through her daughter's achievements and social life. James buried himself deeper in his work, taking on more responsibilities at the firm and spending even less time at home. Neither was willing to admit defeat and file for divorce. Their shared fear of scandal, the comfort of their lifestyle, and concern for how it would affect Mary kept them trapped in their loveless union. Little did they know that their carefully maintained facade was about to crumble in the most unexpected and tragic way. As Mary blossomed from a precocious child into a striking young woman, the dynamics in the Liams' household began to shift. Mary, now 18 and preparing for college. Mary had inherited her mother's grace and her biological father's vivacious spirit. Mary's relationship with her mother had always been close, sometimes strained by Barbara's tendency to overprotect and live through her daughter's experiences with James. However, things had been more complicated in the early years of the marriage. He had been a doting stepfather, attending her recital and helping with homework. But as his marriage to Barbara cooled, so did his interactions with Mary. That changed during Mary's senior year of high school, James, perhaps feeling the weight of his own mortality, as he approached 50, began to take in a renewed interest in his stepdaughter's life. He attended her dance performances, beaming with pride from the audience. He engaged her in conversations about her college plans, offering advice on majors and career paths. Barbara at first was pleased to see James finally acting like part of the family again. She encouraged the father-daughter bonding, hoping it might somehow bridge the gulf in their marriage. But as the months wore on, she began to sense something unsettling in the way James looked at Mary in the way. Their conversations would stop abruptly. When she entered a room, Mary, for her part, found herself drawn to James in a way that both excited and confused her. His attention made her feel seen in a way she hadn't before. She began to dress more carefully. When she knew he'd be home to seek out his company under the guise of needing help with college applications or financial advice, the tension in the house grew palpable. Family dinners became a minefield of loaded glances, double entendres. Barbara watched with growing unease as her daughter and husband orbited each other, their gravitational pull seeming to exclude her entirely. As Mary's high school graduation approached, the Liam house was a powder keg of unspoken desires and simmering resentments. None of them could have predicted the explosion that was to come, or the devastating aftermath that would follow the line between appropriate stepfather-stepdaughter affection and something more sinister was crossed on a rainy night in April. Just weeks before Mary's graduation, Barbara was out of town for a charity event, leaving James and Mary alone in the house. They had settled in to watch a movie, a bottle of wine between them. James reasoning that at 18, Mary was old enough for a glass or two under parental supervision. As the wine flowed and the storm raged outside, their inhibitions lowered. Mary, emboldened by alcohol in the charged atmosphere, confessed to James that she had always found him attractive. James, his judgment clouded and his loneliness overwhelming, responded not with the fatherly dismissal he should have, but with a confession of his own growing feelings. One touch led to another, and soon they found themselves entangled on the couch. Years of suppressed attraction exploding into a passionate encounter. The next morning brought with it shame, confusion, and the thrill of forbidden fruit tasted both. James and Mary swore it would never happen again, that it was a mistake born of loneliness and wine. But the dam had broken and the flood of desire was not so easily contained. Stolen glances became stolen kisses, furtive touches beneath the dinner table, text messages arranging clandestine meetings. They justified their actions to themselves and each other. James wasn't Mary's real father. They reasoned Barbara had been cold and distant for years. They were both consenting adults, love. They told each other couldn't be wrong, but the guilt gnawed at them, particularly Mary. She saw the pain in her mother's eyes, the growing suspicion. She knew the devastating impact this would have if discovered. Yet she couldn't bring herself to end it. Addicted to the rush of their forbidden romance, James compartmentalized as he did with all aspects of his life. When with Barbara, he played the role of distant but dutiful husband with his colleagues. He was the consummate professional, but in those secret moments with Mary, he allowed himself to feel a passion he thought he had lost forever. Their trysts became more frequent and daring as the weeks passed. Rendezvous at a motel on the outskirts of town, under the guise of college tours, heated encounters in James' car, parked in secluded spots. Each time they swore it would be the last. Each time they found themselves drawn back together, powerless against the pull of their illicit desire. But as spring turned to summer, the web of lies they had woven began to tangle, threatening to ensnare them all. As Mary's freshman year of college approached, the affair between her and James intensified. The impending separation seemed to fuel their passion, each encounter tinged with a desperate urgency. They began taking greater risks, their need for each other overriding their caution. James started finding excuses to visit Mary at her college campus, a mere 2-hour drive away. He would claim business meetings in the area, when in reality, he was spending long, luxurious afternoons tangled in the sheets of Mary's dorm room. Mary, for her part, would invent study groups and extracurricular activities to explain her frequent trips home on weekends. Their behavior began to impact their relationships with others. James grew even more distant from Barbara, barely able to look at her without feeling a stab of guilt. He threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, using it as both an escape and an excuse for his absences. Mary struggled to connect with her college peers. Always holding back, always guarding her explosive secret, the affair also began to change them as individuals. James, reinvigorated by his relationship with Mary, started paying more attention to his appearance. He joined a gym, updated his wardrobe, even contemplated hair restoration treatment. His colleagues remarked on his newfound energy, assuming he had finally found work-life balance. Mary, meanwhile, found herself torn between exhilaration and shame. She excelled in her studies, channeling her turbulent emotions into her coursework, but her social life suffered. She rebuffed advances from classmates, unable to contemplate a normal relationship, while entangled with her stepfather. There were close calls that should have served his wake-up call. Once Barbara nearly walked in on them in a compromising position in the pool house, saved only by a well-timed phone call that delayed her arrival home. Another time, one of Mary's dorm mates spotted James leaving her room early in the morning, leading to awkward questions that Mary clumsily deflected. Despite these near misses, James and Mary convinced themselves they could maintain their secret indefinitely. They began making tentative plans for a future together, whispering about the day when they could finally be open about their love. James spoke of divorcing Barbara, of starting a new life with Mary once she finished college. Mary daydreamed about a fairy tale wedding, conveniently ignoring the devastation it would wreak on her mother. But as their fantasy future grew more elaborate, so did the tangled web of lies required to sustain their present. James's finances came under scrutiny at home as Barbara questioned Bong. Increased business expenses and mysterious cash withdrawal. Mary's academic performance, while still strong, began to slip as the stress of her double life took its toll. The pressure began to mount the cracks in their carefully constructed facade, widening day by day. Still, they persisted each stolen moment together, reinforcing their belief that their love was worth any cost. They failed to see that the price would be far higher than either of them could have imagined, and that the bill was coming due far sooner than they knew. It was during a lunch with her friend Patrick, the first inkling of the terrible truth began to form in Barbara's mind. Beatrick, ever the gossip, mentioned offhandedly that she'd seen James and Mary having an intense conversation at a cafe in town, at a time when Mary was supposed to be at college and James at work. The way Beatrick described their body language, leaning in close, hands touching on the table, sent a chill down Barbara's spine. She brushed it off, laughing too loudly and changing the subject. But the seed of suspicion had been planted from that moment on. Barbara began to pay closer attention to the interactions between her husband and daughter. She noticed the lingering glances, the inside joke. She wasn't privy to the way they always seemed to find reasons to be alone together. As the evidence mounted, Barbara found herself trapped in a state of denial. The alternative was too horrible to contemplate. But with each passing day, the truth she didn't want to face inched closer to the surface, threatening to explode into the open and shatter their lives forever. The day Barbara's world imploded started like any other. It was a warm June morning, air heavy with the promise of summer storms. Barbara had plans to meet friends for lunch, but a last-minute cancellation left her with an unexpected free afternoon on a whim. She decided to surprise James at his office, perhaps suggest an impromptu date night, to rekindle their faltering connection. But James wasn't in his office. His assistant, flustered by Barbara's unexpected appearance, let slip that Mr. James had left early, mentioning something about a family emergency. Barbara felt her blood run cold. There was no family emergency she knew of. With trembling hands, she took out her phone and opened the tracking app she had installed weeks ago. In a moment of paranoid weakness, pulsing dot of James's location appeared, not at home, not at any hospital, but at a nondescript address on the outskirts of town. The drive to that address was a blur. Barbara moved on autopilot, her mind racing through possibilities, each more devastating than the last. She pulled up to a small motel, kind that rented rooms by the hour. There in the parking lot was James' car. Barbara sat in her vehicle, paralyzed with indecision. Did she really want to know? Couldn't she just drive away, pretend she'd never seen this? But then another car pulled into the lot. Mary's beat-up college Honda. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, as Barbara watched her daughter hurry across the parking lot and knock on one of the motel room doors. It opened. James' familiar silhouette visible for a moment before Mary slipped inside. Barbara sat in stunned silence, her mind refusing to process what her eyes had just witnessed. Seconds stretched into minutes as she stared at the closed motel room door, willing it to be some sort of mistake, a misunderstanding, anything but the betrayal. It so clearly was finally operating on instinct rather than conscious thought. Barbara got out of her car. She raised her hand to knock, then paused, her fists trembling in midair from inside. She could hear muffled laughter, Mary's musical giggle, James' deeper chuckle, the sounds of happiness and intimacy twisted like a knife in her gut. With a deep breath, Barbara steeled herself and rapped sharply on the door. The laughter inside abruptly ceased, replaced by hushed, panicked whispers. She knocked again, louder this time, her calm facade cracking. As she called out, the silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Before she heard movement inside, the door opened slowly, revealing James, his hair muzz and shirt hastily buttoned behind him. Barbara could see Mary, her face a mask of guilt and fear. In that moment, as Barbara looked from her husband to her daughter, the full weight of their betrayal came crashing down upon her world already fragile. Shattered completely, the tension in the small motel room was suffocating as Barbara stepped inside, her eyes darting between James and Mary for a long moment. No one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the ancient air conditioner and the pounding of Sydney's heart in her ears. James was the first to break the silence, his voice strained as he attempted to explain. Barbara cut him off, her voice eerily calm, stepped forward, attempting to shield Mary. "Barbara, please, this isn't Mary's fault." A harsh laugh escaped Barbara's lips. The argument escalated quickly, years of pent-up resentment and betrayal pouring out. Accusations flew back and forth. Barbara accused James of grooming Mary, of taking advantage of her youth and innocence. James defended their relationship, insisting it was real love, that Mary is an adult now. Mary, caught between her mother and the man she thought she loved, tried desperately to mediate. She pleaded with Barbara to understand, swore that James had never taken advantage of her, that their feelings were mutual. But Barbara was beyond reason in her eyes. This was the ultimate betrayal, not just of her as a wife, but as a mother. As the shouting reached a fever pitch, Barbara noticed James inching towards the bedside table. She saw the glint of metal and realized with a jolt of fear that he was reaching for something. A gun he always kept for protection. Time seemed to slow down. Barbara lunged for James, determined to stop him from doing something unthinkable. Mary, seeing her mother's sudden movement, misinterpreted it as an attack on James and tried to intervene in the ensuing scuffle. The gun went off. The sound of the shot was deafening in the small room for a moment. Everything went still. Then Mary crumpled to the floor, a red stain blossoming on her shirt. Barbara's scream of anguish shattered the silence. James stood frozen, the gun slipping from his nerveless fingers, as Barbara frantically tried to stem the blood flowing from her daughter's wound. The full horror of what had happened began to sink in. Their secret was out, and the consequences were far more devastating than any of them could have imagined. The gunshot at the motel brought a swift response from local law enforcement within minutes. The small parking lot was awash in flashing lights as police cars and an ambulance converged on the scene. First responders found a tableau of tragedy in room 114. Lise lay on the floor, barely clinging to life, despite Barbara's desperate attempts to stop the bleeding. James Liam sat slumped in a corner, his eyes vacant, the gun still on the floor where he had dropped it. Barbara, her hands and clothes covered in her daughter's blood, alternated between frantic pleas to the paramedics and incoherent sobs. Detective Robert Donovan, a veteran of the small police force, took charge of the scene as Mary was rushed to the hospital. Donovan began the grim task of piecing together what had happened in that motel room. The physical evidence was clear enough: one shot fired, one victim. The gun registered to James Liam, but the why of it all was murky. Initial questioning of Barbara and James yielded conflicting stories, both too distraught to provide a coherent account of events. As news of the shooting spread, the quiet community was rocked by shock and disbelief. The Liams had always seemed like the perfect family, successful, respected, involved in local charities. The idea that such violence could erupt among them was almost inconceivable to their neighbors and friends in the days that followed, as Mary fought for her life in the ICU. Detective Donovan and his team worked tirelessly to unravel the truth. They combed through phone records, interviewed friends and colleagues, and dug into the family's background. Slowly, a picture began to emerge of a family, not nearly as perfect as their polished exterior suggested. As Detective Donovan delved deeper into the Liam case, the facade of the perfect family crumbled. Rapidly, interviews with family, friends, and colleagues painted a picture of a marriage, long devoid of love, held together by appearances and financial convenience. Beatrice Whitaker, Barbara, closest friend, provided crucial information about Barbara's growing suspicions. In the months leading up to the shooting, she recounted tearful lunches where Barbara had confided her fears about James' possible infidelity, never suspecting the true nature of his betrayal. James' co-workers described a man who had seemed rejuvenated in recent months, speaking often of a new love in his life. They had assumed he was having a typical midlife crisis affair, never imagining the object of his affection was his own stepdaughter. But it was Mary college roommate Catherine who provided the most damning evidence. Once assured of police confidentiality, Catherine shared a trove of text messages Mary had sent her detailing the affair with James in the sort of giddy love-struck language, typical of a young woman in the throes of what she believed to be true love. The digital trail proved to be a goldmine for investigators. Subed phone records showed hundreds of calls and messages between James and Mary, often at odd hours. Financial records showed a pattern of expensive gifts from James to Mary. Jewelry, designer clothes, even a car, all carefully hidden from Barbara. There were records of hotel stays, weekend getaways disguised as business trips or college visits. As the evidence mounted, the full extent of James and Mary's deception became clear. This was no sudden passion, no momentary lapse in judgment. Their affair had been going on for over a year, meticulously planned and hidden from Barbara in the world. The revelation of the affair shed new light on the events in the motel room. What had first appeared to be a case of accidental discharge during a heated argument now looked more like a potential crime of passion as Mary slowly recovered in the hospital. The question on everyone's mind was who had really pulled the trigger. Was it James attempting to silence Mary to save himself? Barbara in a fit of rage at their betrayal, or Mary herself, overcome with guilt and shame? When confronted by her mother, the truth Detective Donovan suspected might be more complex than any of them had initially thought. District Attorney took personal charge of the case after reviewing the evidence gathered by Detective Donovan and his team. She made the decision to charge both James and Barbara Liam with attempted murder. James, once the picture of corporate success, appeared haggard and defeated in his orange jumpsuit. His defense team, led by high-powered attorney Xavier Brockton, argued that the shooting had been a tragic accident, the result of a struggle for the gun during a heated family argument. Barbara, by contrast, seemed to have aged years in the weeks since the incident. Her lawyer painted her as a victim, a woman betrayed by her husband and daughter, who had acted in self-defense when she believed Barbara was reaching for the gun to silence them. Both the question of Mary's role in the incident loomed large over the proceeding. As the only witness to the shooting, besides her parents, her testimony would be crucial, but Mary, still recovering from her injuries, had so far invoked her Fifth Amendment rights, refusing to testify against either parent. In the end, James Liam accepted the plea deal in a hushed courtroom. He pleaded guilty to aggravated assault, receiving a sentence of 10 years in prison as he was led away in handcuffs. He locked eyes with Barbara one last time, a look that spoke volumes about the pain, betrayal, and regret that had torn their family apart. Barbara, charges against her dropped, left the courthouse a free woman, but one irrevocably changed by the ordeal within months. She had sold the family home and moved out of state, seeking a fresh start away from the whispers and sidelong glances. Mary, once she recovered from her physical wounds, faced the daunting task of healing her emotional and psychological scars. She withdrew from college, entering intensive therapy to deal with the trauma of the shooting and the complicated emotions surrounding her relationship with James. Her relationship with Barbara remains strained, the breach of trust between mother and daughter, a chasm not easily bridged. The Liam case faded from the national spotlight, but its impact lingered. It served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most picture-perfect family can harbor dark secrets. The community, shaken by the violence that had erupted in their midst, began initiatives to address domestic violence and promote healthier family dynamics. Thanks for watching World True Crime. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more real-life crime stories from around the world. Stay safe.